Rick, did you have a question?
Yes, I did. It's something that I'd heard a lot recently. The Swami commented in Italy about it, and Jyotish picked it up also. It's in the festival, peace awaits you in the unknown, and I wondered what that meant. And it seems like we've only touched the surface of it. There's a real meaning to it that we haven't gotten anywhere near.
What did Swami say? Do you recall? I haven't heard it specifically, so I don't know.
No, I don't remember the context.
Do you remember what it meant to you? What you think he said?
Well, I had the feeling that you had to go beyond the known, like what Jyotish was saying. We surround ourselves
Oh, I see, with this
the
little
known.
picture, yeah.
And we keep out reality by seeing only what we want to see.
It's interesting that you pick up, this is a question to expand upon the meaning of the phrase in the festival, peace awaits you in the unknown. That's one of my favorite phrases in there. I often want to stop in the middle of reading those things and sort of ask people if they really got what was there. See what comes just before it. Can anyone remember? Should I get the book? Let me get it, because I know it's sort of leads from one place to the next. That's right. See, first he says, that bird's brief day was like eons of our time. First he revolts. He revolts against the mission God gave him. Then afternoon came and it entered a storm cloud and soon found itself struggling for its life. And the more it fought, the weaker it became. So then the wind says, give yourself into my hands. If we cooperate, you'll be stronger. And then the bird heeded this counsel and found itself soaring joyously high above the clouds. So it got the first step. The first step was, instead of setting itself contrary to what life brought it. See, this first he thought to act selfishly, to consider myself first. That was the revolt. God said to share it with all, and then the bird said, no, I think I'm going to keep it all for myself. And so he does that. But then what happens is, because he's so concentrated on himself, there's this great universal flow of energy that he's going against all the time. And the more he tries to go against it, the weaker he becomes. It's sort of like, for a while, the independence of the ego works, but then there's a time at which you just become more and more frantic and you can't make it work by yourself. So then the wind says, cooperate with me. Just cooperate with the flow, and then we'll work together. You'll find that if you go with where the wind is blowing, then you can go twice as fast. And so that lifted him above difficulties. But then it comes, hours passed, night fell. The little bird grew afraid. How, it cried, can I fly in this darkness? And the night whispered, fear not, for peace awaits you in the unknown. Surrender to me and your strength will be renewed. And after a time, I love that. And after a time, how long a time? That's what I like about it. And after a time, after 100 billion lifetimes.
More depressing.
Yeah, really. The tiny rebel surrendered. Also, I love the fact that he uses tiny. The tiny rebel surrendered and found the night's counsel true. And then it says, in rain and sky and grassy fields all sang, your very strength to fly has never been your own. Look to the source. So, I mean, it seems that it's pretty much in essence just what you said, but so much of our fear is that we imagine if it doesn't already fit into the picture that we already have, then somehow it's going to be something bad for us. And it's just so often it's all that we're afraid of is that this isn't what we already know. And so it just becomes afraid. It's like we're not even fighting, we're just afraid. Because we don't know, because we're so used to operating on the rational elements of the ego. How can I fly in this darkness is what the bird says. I mean, I've got my system worked out, but it's all about I. And then the night just says, there's a tremendous amount of peace in the unknown. Peace awaits you in the unknown. Because there's nothing outside of, there's nothing to fear. It's
like
always
dissolution of the ego?
It's the dissolution of the ego is what it always means to me, because it's the known is the ego. And there's all this peace when we just surrender to the fact that we don't know. And it's also, it is progressive, because it's in order to get to the point where you're a devotee, where you can even think about being a disciple, where you can even think about bringing God into your life, you have to have put out a lot of personal energy to sort of break away from the mass hypnosis of life. And it's sort of like everybody in the world wants you to go in a certain way. They just want you to be unthinking. I don't mean individual people, but I mean there's just this mass energy that just says, get your new house, of course you're happy. What do you mean you don't feel happy? Of course you're happy. What are you talking about? You got it all. That kind of energy. And you're just this sort of, you have to be very strong in yourself to say, I know what I want, I know what I'm going to do, I'm looking for it like this, but it's because it's oppositional energy to the mass consciousness. It's like the ego has to get very powerful to be an individual. It has to get so powerful that it reaches the limits of its own ability. And when you take the discipleship vow, it's a very long story, and it says, I tried hard, really hard, to do it my way, and guess what? It didn't work. So now I'm going to surrender to the infinite. I'm going to offer myself to the infinite. So you get on the spiritual path, and there's this constant, especially at the beginning, but really all the way through, recognition that the very thing that served me well up until now is not my friend anymore. Now I have to learn first to cooperate with the flow, with a higher flow, not the down-pulling flow. And then I just have to step off the abyss and go to territory where by its very definition I'm not in control of it anymore. It's the darkness of, it's Fichte that says peace awaits you in the unknown.
Right.
I mean, it's night. Night is not unknown, but it's the symbolic darkness of just not knowing what's on the other side of it. I know this way of functioning. What is that way of functioning going to be like? But there's so much freedom in it because we inherently know that this little ego is so powerless. It's very scary to be here. It's really scary to be so in charge when you have the secret knowledge that you're just a tiny rebel. You could be pinched out by any moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's what it always feels. Every time I say that peace awaits you in the unknown, I just feel all this sort of potential glory waiting for us if we just weren't so cowardly and so insistent on just holding on to what we already know. This works for me. I see it. I remember when we started the community, and people were just so hesitant, people were so hesitant to leave the places they were in order to move into this community that I imagined that everyone was living, in some glorious mansion. And then sometimes I'd visit people and I'd see where they were living, which it wasn't like nobody was living in a hovel, but it wasn't much to defend in a lot of cases. It was merely familiar, and it's almost like it's not even like it was good, but like they know how bad it can get.
Right.
And they're just afraid that it'll get worse if they go into something else. But there's this piece of just saying, this is what life is like, I take it. Freedom in that.
I wondered if Swami had meant something beyond that.
If he has, I don't know.
Oh, okay.
What would you think?
No, just a meditation, the unknown and how to access that.
But you can, it applies.
Right.
If you're talking about it when you go into meditation too, the fear of the unknown in meditation is also very powerful. Swamiji talks about himself in the years of his meditation, he always said he became afraid of the peace. He was just afraid of all that silence. And in the book Super Consciousness, Awakening to Super Consciousness, he has that really remarkable part. I think it's in that book, it might be in the Hindu Way of Waking, but he talks about how frightening it is to realize that there's only one consciousness. And that it's frightening to realize that how can you...
There's nothing else out there.
There's nothing out there. You are alone. He said, and there's just that and there's that desire to keep, desire to be something else besides you, because the first thought of it is that it feels lonely. And then he says, and it is lonely, it's true. He said there's this just intense loneliness when you realize that there's only one consciousness. And then after that comes great bliss. Once you surrender to that unknown reality, then this great bliss comes. So I think it's true, I think it's true all the way in meditation, that you're meditating and then let's see how to say it. I can feel it, but I'm trying to think how to say it. Like, how far can we go? And it is the letting go of the ego and letting go of the control and letting go of knowing what you're doing. I remember saying to Swamiji once, I was describing some experience that I had, and he said, "Don't be afraid." And I said, "I'm not afraid!" And then I heard my voice. And then I thought, maybe I am afraid. And maybe I'm just afraid of the expansiveness, the bird in the cage. Yeah, it just, everybody tells you it's light, but what is it really? It's just something you don't know. So the mind thinks about dinner. And just goes back to the familiar. And I mean, now we're hitting on something else there too. The familiar is always is this agitated, ever-changing. And if we step outside of the familiar, we may define. If we're willing to abandon the personality that we have, we may discover there's a lot of peace on the other side. Abandon the thoughts, abandon all the attachments.
No more identification with them.
Yeah. But then what would I be?
Right.
If I wasn't busy doing this? A psychic woman said something interesting once. She was helping me through a certain just dilemma that I was in, kind of an attitude toward life I just couldn't get out of. And it seemed so self-evidently not happy. And she just smiled at me so sweetly and said, "And what are you getting out of it?" It was a very good question. What are you getting out of it? In other words, I said, "Oh, I feel unhappy for this, I feel unhappy for that." She said, "Well, what are you getting out of it? In other words, why do you cling to it?" And boy, when she asked me that question, did I have a lot of answers. It was real clear to me what I was getting out of it. What I was getting out of it was the protection from having to do anything else. As long as I did that, then I didn't have to go into the unknown.
So it's always at the edge, the unknown.
Yeah, it's always at the edge. Because there was the need to be deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as I could stay where I was, I didn't have to face that. Who would I become if I couldn't be this? I read in the paper that psychologists say, now that Prozac is so popular and is such a good antidepressant, counselors have to help people on Prozac through the grieving process for their old unhappy selves. Now, I mean, that sounds so ridiculous, but on the other hand, it's true. It's like I am an unhappy person and that's my identity. It keeps me busy. It keeps me really, really busy and out of trouble.
Right. Structures your life.
Right, defines me. What if I get happy, then what will I do?
Well, it changes everything because your friends have changed. Your friends who like you miserable like that don't like you when you're happy.
Oh yeah, it was absurd, but also true.
It's lonely because nothing else fits to the new you.
Boy, everybody seems to say, no, this one. Yeah, no, but it's true.
It's part of the scary thing of making big changes in your life is because you are familiar with however sick it is, you're familiar with it.
Peace awaits you in the unknown.
So is everybody.
Yeah, but that's right, isn't it? Yeah. But change of consciousness, I mean, change of level in meditation is the same thing.
Right.
Where does this lead?
You keep giving up what you do.
Excuse me, Leslie? No, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I didn't know you were still speaking. Okay. Okay, Leslie.
Can you go back to something you said when you were going through this? Something about how society's going in one way, and it took our ego to, did you say to actually stop and be able to turn around? It took that strength of the ego to actually be able to...
Yeah,
let me get my...
Okay.
You just kind of verify... Let me go back. I'm having all this... I've always viewed the ego as something that I developed that I shouldn't have.
Oh, that's right.
And so you're just saying that validated.
What your premise is wrong. The ego, I developed it and I shouldn't have. That's a false premise. So
Right.
let's work on that. And no, your ego. The reason that human beings can evolve by conscious will, and animals can only evolve instinctively. I mean, animals progress through the various stages of evolution, from lower to higher animals, eventually to the human level, but they're just scooted along by instinct. You know, they can't decide to progress. They just progress because it just happens. Human beings can consciously accelerate their spiritual evolution by deliberate actions of their own, or they could also consciously de-accelerate their spiritual evolution. That's because we have an ego. That's because we have the consciousness of ourselves that can objectify ourselves and deliberately act for our own interests or bad interests, but deliberately act for what we believe to be our own interests. And just look at before you come to the point where you can become free of that. You have to fully evolve it to the point where you own it enough to offer it. You see, that's why actually Swami, he uses the word surrender in here, and he sometimes uses it, but he much prefers the word self-offering. And self-offering is important because you can't offer what you don't own. All right? And so that's one level of it, which is that you have to own your individuality and be in command of your individuality. You cannot, if the ego is weak, oftentimes people will be attracted to be devotees when the ego is weak because they're hoping to avoid the effort of developing strength. And they'll try to surrender, they'll try to give away what they don't own. They'll see the spiritual path as a shortcut rather than the actual challenge that it really is. Now that's sort of a multi-dimension thing, because what will happen is people who have a genuine heart for God will at the same time be looking for a way to avoid certain things. And so they'll come into spiritual life, and depending on what path you're on, but when you finally get toward real self-realization, they'll try to cheat. But sooner or later, the true devotion of their heart will blow up the subterfuge, and you have to basically gain courage, the courage of your own self, so that then you can make the heroic self-offering. But all the way through your spiritual life, your ego, I know there's different definitions of it. Ego is the soul identified with the body, is how we define that. But that's also, your ego is very much your friend. And that personal power of the ego that can stand by itself and set its mind and do what it wants to do is exactly what you have to have for the spiritual path. You just have to direct it toward the right end. You have to direct it toward your aspirations instead of towards your disintegration, so to speak. And you really should be very careful not to set yourself at war with yourself. It's very, very unhealthy, which is what I hear in what you're saying, to set yourself at war with yourself. You are your own best friend, and you can become a better and better friend by using all that power to go upward, by using that power to cooperate, by using that power to face and overcome your fears. And gradually, it's not like you overcome the ego, it's that you merge the ego into the infinite. I mean, it's more, I don't know whether that's like, quote, technically correct, but from the point of view of understanding how to live, that's what you're trying to do. You're not trying to renounce it or hate it, you're just trying to get it to be an instrument of your own best welfare instead of an instrument of not your welfare. Does that make sense?
Yes, I just got the phrase teaching it new habits.
Well, teaching it new habits is a good idea. Yeah, yeah, you have to work.
New habits of what? What it wants.
Yeah, what it wants. Teach it to want the right things, and ultimately, then it will disappear. And then there is all those things about that. But the worst thing you can do on the spiritual path, one of the worst things you can do, is divide yourself. Because you have to be your own best friend. And so and many of our desires and our impulses are really God-given. I mean, deeply God-given, because they move us. And sometimes they move us into happy experiences, sometimes they move us into painful experiences, but they move us into experience, which moves us gradually into wisdom.
You know, it's interesting because I know these things, you know,
Right.
at so many levels, and yet when I'm confronted with, you know, that phrase, whatever you said, that switch, where I could see where there's a part of me that doesn't buy into it, into the knowing. So that's a place I can clean up and work on. Now, it brings me to my next question that I came in tonight with, was that I understand at a lot of levels the concept of self-realization. Mm-hmm. And I know someday I'll get there because that's where I'm headed. Mm-hmm. But you know, when I look at myself just on a day-to-day, you know, Monday, and here I am going through my life level, the concept of self-realization is just so far beyond my comprehension of seeing where I am in the equation of it all.
Right.
Which, you know, on the one hand, it really doesn't matter where I am.
God knows.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you think, is what you mean.
But what I struggle with is my ability to not be discouraged.
Right.
You know, my ability not to go at war with myself.
Right.
So what I'm wanting, here's the question, some real practical things that one can do when they're confronted with that, not confronted with the being at war with yourself, though that's part of it, but just a way of going through, you know,
I mean, how are you going to last the rest of the incarnation?
no, just more on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment. How do you stay reminded that, oh yeah, okay, this is where I am, this is what I'm doing, just a kind of a way to move through my day so that I can constantly keep reminding myself, you know, and it's a state of mind, you know. I'm surrounded by Master's pictures everywhere, right. You know, I play Swami's music, you know. I mean, there's a lot of, I'm doing all the things I could physically do, but there's something here that I know that I can do more of, so that I'm not, you know.
Yeah. Yes and no. You can't squeeze this out of yourself, and it's not like you know, you can't just apply more and more pressure. In fact, that's almost the opposite of what you need to do. It's sort of like, I hear what you're saying about just there must be something more. And that's sort of, that goes back to the side of saying the ego has got this idea that it can make this happen, where it's really just already happening, and all we need to do is just tune in to it being there, and almost to a certain extent not weigh and measure and evaluate quite so much. Practically speaking, let's say what I find the most useful is the 8 manifestations of spirit, which when I used to teach meditation, when I bring it in every class I can possibly bring it into, even as tangentially as I can, even if it's like really tenuous. Because on a very practical level, ask ourselves, what is it? What does it mean to really be in tune with the Spirit? To be God remembering. I know people sometimes think it means that somehow, that it means something different than it means. The stuff of our spirituality is the stuff of what we already are. And to be a spiritual person is really to be just what you are, only a little more of it. It's not like you have to pop into some other thing. The 8 manifestations of Spirit: love, peace, joy, wisdom, calmness, energy, light, and sound. So what it is to be in tune with God is to be an expression of any one of those qualities. And so on a day-to-day basis, it's just what flows through you. That's all that you are. And so in every situation, one or another of those qualities will be just what you need. And if we define our spirituality just entirely in terms of the quality of consciousness that's flowing through us, and given the incredible complexity of what goes on in our lives, sometimes you're just in the midst of a war and calmness is all you can do. Sometimes you're just feeling so just dragged down and under that you've just got to manifest energy. It doesn't make any difference even what kind of energy, just manifest energy. Just ride a bike or run in place or bake a batch of cookies, because it's just time to manifest energy. And if in every circumstance of your life, you just sort of, and the other thing that goes with it, the way I like to think of it is, whatever you're doing, there's always the highest and the lowest aspect of it. I don't even mean big, I just mean like tiny. There's always a north and south pole. And so if you're in a situation, just always try to strike the highest note in that you can strike. And I don't mean the highest note theoretically, but just like, given my present state of consciousness, my present state of energy, the mood I'm in, I'm on the telephone. I was just caught in traffic earlier this evening, and I just felt myself really starting to get impatient about it. I mean, it wasn't a question of my being able to sort of shift into samadhi at that point. I couldn't shift into samadhi. But there was this much margin, between getting really upset about being stuck in traffic and being able to just breathe and just accept that I was stuck in traffic. So it wasn't like, as I said, it wasn't a theoretical issue. It was just in this little band of my reactions to just keep nudging it up on the upper edge. And that sounds like such a small practice. But just doing that on a consistent basis, everything becomes different. That and solving every problem by thinking, which of the 8 manifestations of Spirit can I get into now? And that way you're never wrong. You've never failed, because you've always gone to you've always at least tried. And if you go to the bottom of this one, then look for the polarity over here. If I was going to get up for meditation, but I didn't, and I'm still in bed, okay, shall I just let my mind wander, or shall I say, oh, I mean, you can always find a peace. And as soon as you find a peace where you can stand, that's the upper edge, then that gives you a minute to deal with, and you just keep inching it out. And then you just get in the habit of always, going like that. And then the other, as I said, is solve problems with the 8 manifestations of Spirit. What does the situation need that I can give it? And that helps you to sort of see the God dimension in things, whatever they are.
It's very helpful.
Yeah, it is very helpful. I use it all the time. And then I can even say, then, for example, I was so mad at them, but at least I stayed calm. I was just saying, you get really upset. I'm so mad at somebody, I could just, I'm so mad, but I stayed calm. I wasn't joyful, I wasn't loving, but at least I was calm.
So what if you're none of that?
Pardon me?
What if you're none of that?
Well, then you just be energy.
Okay.
You see, it always works. Okay, so at least you're furious. At least you're putting out a lot of energy.
And yelling and
Well, you're putting out a lot of energy. But then you choose, okay, Donna, then you choose of the options, of the things I could say right now because I'm furious. There's probably...
cuss.
Yeah, so I won't cuss. Right. No, but see how it always works? There's always a top and a bottom.
Okay.
And then it occurs to you to say something just really foul, but you don't. You say something moderately foul, and then that's your victory for the day. You know? And it always just keeps you going. Because it's all directional. This is what Swamiji always emphasizes. We think of it as static. It's not static because we are not static. We're energy in motion. So we're not defined by anything. As he put it, by the time you can see it, it's no longer true. Because as soon as it's done, it's behind you. So all that counts is where you're going. And if you just keep going up, then that's who you are. He's brilliant. It's a brilliant solution.
It also keeps you from getting really down.
It keeps you from getting really down.
You're digging a hole for yourself.
Absolutely. You just choose the top end of it.
That's excellent.
You know, it's amazing because I'm starting, you said something, I don't know what it was, the last class or maybe on Sunday, at some point in the recent past, out of your mouth came something about how critical it is to really appreciate ourselves through the process, something to that effect. And I thought, oh yeah, okay, yeah, we have to love ourselves and not beat ourselves up. I mean, you know, you hear this so much, it's almost like, I know that, but no one really lives that. And so but I thought, okay, but what if you could, Leslie? So I've been really just kind of focusing in on that, and I'm seeing that I rarely just let myself be where I'm at and be okay with it. So it's like this thing, you know, real turn. So it's just pretty amazing.
It's pretty amazing. You also have to understand, it takes time. You know, we get really impatient. I've really been on the path now, seriously, since about 1969, about 30 years. I mean, it just amazes me to say that. We were talking earlier about having a 40th birthday. I mean, I've been on the path for 30 years. And it really just takes time. You know, I feel so different than I did when I started. And I know it's just because, you know, through thin and thick and falling on my nose so many times, just so many times, I just got up again. You know, and it works. That's really all I'm saying. It just works. That's all. Just stick with it. It works. And then little by little, just tiny, you know, one day you really get this point, and then the next week you kind of get that one. And something happens.
What's the option?
Yeah, that's what holds me. That's what's helped me all the way through. Where else could I go, Lord?
So the ego would keep me going.
Yeah, the ego will keep you going.
But it also, it's the ego that falls flat on my, that's the part of me that falls, the prideful part that judges and critical and falls flat on my face, and it keeps me from...
You know, I don't like using the word ego much, because I think it's confusing.
It distorted self.
It distorts it because it's just, you know, there's just one consciousness. So I just prefer to think, you know, that we're all in this together. I don't like to think there's my ego and then there's God.
It creates a duality within
It creates a
yourself.
duality, exactly. It puts you at war with yourself. And even though I understand that, you know, there's truth in it and we can say it at times, and on occasion I've been able to say, and I think it's a valid thing, oh, the only reason I'm upset is because of my ego. But what I really mean by that is pride, which is a more accurate word than ego. You know, the only reason I'm upset is because of my pride, because I want to be better than I am, or I'm embarrassed, or I'm attached. Those are what I mean by all of that, but I'd rather say what I actually mean. Because then I'm not at war with myself, because I'm a good person. It's just that I let pride take me over, you see. I let embarrassment take me over. If I describe the quality, then I can put, it's a behavior. It's not a self-definition. Ego becomes a self-definition and you get all mixed up. But ego is the one that says, where else could I go? And so therefore, if ego is going to say, where else could I go, Lord, I have to stay here, then ego is your best friend.
So how would one manifest light or sound?
Well, light has two meanings. So light also means light. Instead of things being heavy, it also means light. But it's like, you can just sort of almost see an atmosphere gets dark. Everybody's discouraged and people don't feel happy. You can almost look at it. You can see it's dark. And so you can manifest lightness by laughter, by saying something kind to someone, by opening the windows, by bringing in flowers. You change the vibration from dark to light. Sound, of course, sound means more listening to the Om. What that really means is the Om vibration. But of course, word that comes out of your mouth is sound. And so you can manifest God as sound by what you say. And use your voice, the tone of your voice and the content of your voice, or by using music. Or chanting.
I guess I always thought of that as going inward, but I thought of those qualities as being part of meditation as opposed to outward things.
Well, both are true. You can also use sound by meditating inwardly, visualizing the light, listening to the Om. And then your consciousness shifts and you become an expression of that. So all of that is so. But that is a good question. Sometimes the best way to help things is go, just like, we need a little calmness here, But it has to be the right setting. Or you can do it inwardly. It's not
In
like,
the office is not
I was
necessarily
just
a
going
good
to
time.
say.
Visiting a client, not necessarily a good
It's
time.
okay in the office. Yeah, it
It
depends.
depends.
People in my office now, when things are getting a little chaotic, they will look at me and they will go, see?
That's good. That's good. You've trained it.
And there's a lightness in that too.
Yeah.
There is. Yeah, same thing happens to me.
They think they're making fun of me.
They look at you and they go, they go, I just nod, and then they smile.
So there's the answer.
You just have to start opening the office. I guess.
Yeah. But you don't want to be.
No place like home.
Yeah. You don't want to be too weird, too ostentatiously weird, because it draws attention to it. So, but nonetheless, I totally agree with you. You can do a lot more than you think you can. You can do a lot if you're just cool and confident and relaxed in it. People will take it from you. If you're not putting if you're not trying to put something on them, if you're just really sincerely trying to love them, people will let you do a lot. Yeah. It's all an attitude. You can get away with anything if you have the right attitude. Swamiji was talking specifically about a woman that was criticized first by another woman, and the woman being criticized just hated it, and was furious at that other lady for the rest of her life. Swami said exactly the same thing to the girl, and she took it beautifully, because she felt from Swamiji there was nothing but love. So we all know that. Love, see, one of the 8. Wisdom, how it all fits. Yeah. You won't find a circumstance that can't be, in which you can't express one of those, because there is nothing exists. Also, I don't know, I found it fruitful, this is just myself, to forget about being self-realized, because it made the spiritual path about some kind of external achievement. And so it just, I've done my best to forget about it. It was only in the middle of the court case when things were just, when this world was such a foul and despicable place, that I thought passionately about being self-realized. But I thought about it much more then than I normally do, because I don't know what to do about it when I think about it. I'm running as fast as I can. I'm doing the best that I can do. I don't really know what more I could do, so what's the point? It just makes me goal-oriented towards something I can't figure out anyway. So I just concentrate on the qualities that will bring it to me, rather than the thing itself. Does that make sense? Yeah. And in God's good time. And I really, really profoundly believe what Master says about how extraordinarily spiritually advanced we are even to be here, compared to the 100 gazillion billion lifetimes it took us to get to here. So, there you are. We're close to the end. And in my lighter moments, in my clearer moments, I really look at things and I think, God knows I'm riddled with desires, but on another level, I don't want anything except this. And so if you really are honest and clear with yourself, in the circumstances one gets sucked into all kinds of stuff, but on a really deep level. Swamiji was talking somewhere about how when something happened to him and another disciple mistreated Kriyananda, Yogananda was sort of like standing up for Kriyananda and said, I wouldn't go through what he went through for $1 million. You remember that? And Swamiji laughed when he was telling the story. He says, what would $1 million mean to Yogananda? As if that was like some big statement. I wouldn't do it for $1 million. But it's sort of like, it was a fun thought to contemplate. Well, what would $1 million mean to me? Is there anything I would do for $1 million? You think, no, it wasn't right.
Will you tell us again what the 8 manifestations of the Spirit?
Love, joy, peace, calmness, wisdom, energy, light, and sound. If you think about it hard enough, you'll come to it.
There's got to be a way to arrange those letters into a word. So
Give us an
You'll do
acronym.
it.
I will do it.
Report on us.
Because I have terrible memory.
Did you come up with one?
No, I'm not that bright. I have to actually look at it and not forget.
That's right. We'll work on it.
Any other questions or comments?
So for this week, it's a couple of those manifestations already, if I can't remember all 8 of them.
50%, right? It's okay.
The thing about all 8 is that sometimes the ones that you can remember don't work. You have to think about something else.
What helps me in the service when somebody reads off the quality for the week is?
Yeah.
And I try during the week, I don't try, I just focus on that simple
Yeah.
aspect.
There is so much. Yogananda said, he actually said, you only have to do 10% of what I teach. But he said, everybody's going to do a different 10%. That's why I teach so much. And so you find not only, there's just so many different levels of it. There's different gurus. There's different practices. There's the quality of the week. There's this technique. There's the higher kriyas. There's the 8 manifestations. There's the energization exercises. There's devotion. There's japa. And you just go like this. So you just take some little tiny thing. And I've found over the years, I remember for a while in a trailer that I lived in, I slept here like this, and I had the pictures of the masters up like that. And one night, in the middle of the night, Babaji just fell on my chest, just like that, just crashed down on my chest. So I sort of picked it up and I said, well, I guess there's something in this for me. And it was just sort of like the time, and I kind of just tried to relate more to Babaji. I never really had that much. And it just became real. Recently, I've picked up scientific healing affirmations, and somehow, I've had that book forever, somehow that's speaking to me now. And I've just started memorizing and using a lot of those affirmations that I've done intermittently, but this is somehow, that number is up. And I also think of it sort of a little bit the way I feel about an exercise program. It's like, you just have to do something. And you just do this or you do that. And it's sort of, I feel like about health in general, you just, every so often you have to just do a little something. You have to go off weed for a while, or, just do something. And I've tended to feel it's kind of random. It's just that you have to put out a little energy. you have to earn it. Maybe it's more systematic than that, but it feels kind of random. The numbers come up and you just do it again. But it's spiritually too. It's just like you'll do this for a while and that'll work for you, and then it'll stop working, you do this. We teach people meditation, we say at a certain point you have to become, Swami describes it, there's the science and then there's the art. And the science is, this is how Kriya is done, this is how Hong So is done, this is how you sit. This is, it's very clear, and you shouldn't monkey with those things. But the art is, with all of these colors, what is my particular painting going to look like? What really is mine? And you'll have to have also someone, the other night asked, was talking about the Festival of Light, And she was saying that she doesn't really like the standing up, sitting down stuff. And it was a fair question. I took me a minute to tune into it, and I told her that I didn't particularly like it either. And so once when I was with Swamiji, I sort of basically said, do we have to stand up and sit down all the time? I said, I find when I'm in the congregation that I just get really still and I just like to stay there. And he said, no, I like it the way it is. That was his answer, zip. That was the end of it. It wasn't a long discussion. And because he said that, I don't feel the freedom to change it. But I just said to her, sit down, don't stand up. Nobody's making you stand up just because somebody in front says, stand up. You don't have to stand up. And it's sort of like, you have to have the courage to do what you feel. You have to have the humility to recognize that you might not always know what's right, and therefore you've got to also listen and not think that you can innovate before you have a clue. And so it's a fine line that you have to walk, but I think it's great. If you don't want to stand up, just sit there. I mean, if that really moves you, if you've experimented and you really feel it, just do what you feel. Have the nerve to do that. It's very, very important. In the new book that he's writing, there's a chapter about, this is the commentary on the parallel passages in the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. There's a whole chapter about the role of institution in spiritual life versus the individual, and what the individual needs to do. And he comes down pretty heavy on the side of the individual, but he also says you've got to be realistic. Almost everyone needs the energy of the group. And you can't let your pride in saying, I'm not an institution person, really just be an excuse to allow yourself to come in at a lower energy level than that group asks of you. Or to recognize your vulnerability, that if you don't unite yourself with like-minded people, you're really not going to be able to hold it. But at the same time, he just says, no institution ever gave a person God realization. You have to earn it on your own, and that's just all there is to it. So it's one of these lines. Institutions help, and they help a great deal. And you need to cooperate with what's helping you. You can't just take without giving. Sometimes people say, well, I'm not much of an institutional person, and what they mean is, I want to take what I can get from this. But when it comes time for me to take my responsibilities, I don't want to take the responsibility. So it's a fine line. But still, you have to just know for yourself what your path is, and that's that. And then even within however close the tribe, you have to do it yourself. And if it means you have to diverge, you have to diverge. On one of these tapes from Assisi, Swami was talking about life flows on like a river, which is a song that he wrote. And he said, Anandi told me she didn't like that song very much. And Swami said, and I mean, I don't know why Anandi didn't like it, but he said, I'm glad she was, I want people to be sincere with me. He said, I don't want people to say they like something when they don't. He said, what will that serve us? He might have gone on to sort of, I don't know what he said after that about why she should have liked it or could have liked it, but if she doesn't, she doesn't. Zip, that's the end of the story. We need to be careful in ourselves that we don't limit ourselves to the knowing. But still, it's always important. Or that we don't say they're bad people or they're stupid people or they're tacky people because I don't like something. Comments? Questions? Yes,
question to change the subject.
Sure.
In terms of avatars like Jesus Christ or Master, are they actually born avatars? Are they born self-realized? Or do they become self-realized during that lifetime? Because it always seems that they go through a process of learning and stuff, which to me is contrary to being born an avatar.
Right. Now, to be an avatar means to be born free. So if you are an avatar, that by definition, that means you're born free. Jesus said, born without sin was the phrase he used, which means born without karma, which means that nothing compels them to incarnate. They never have to take another physical body. There isn't an ounce of karma that has to be worked out. Souls can be born You could be in your last lifetime. Or Swamiji, there's in different books he describes it in detail. You can be Jivan Mukta, which means Jiva means the individual entity, the divine entity, which is you. Mukta means free. You're Jivan Mukta, which means you could exercise the willpower and the energy to dissolve the remaining bits of karma, but you're just letting it run. And so you incarnate with this tiny little shadow of karma because you keep coming back because it's good for the world and you don't really much care. Okay, that's how he describes it. And sometimes I think Swami is a Jivan Mukta. That's what I think he's working with. So things happen, but there's just such a freedom inside of him that he's not really. Things are happening around him, but the string of ego is cut. It's not really. I don't say that definitively. I'd say that as my opinion because I would have no way of knowing because I'm not one. But it certainly seems that's what he seems to be. But the reason an avatar appears to have to go through sadhana is because they take on their lives as an example. And it's sort of like accepting a part in a play. And if you're going to accept the part in the play, you can't sort of halfway through say, but this isn't me. You have to say, oh, this is what I have to do. And so I have to live out the role. And also Swamiji gave us this perfect phrase, which I just love, a way of saying it. He said, an avatar is bound. Once he incarnates in the physical body, he's bound by the time and place in which he is incarnated and the karma of his disciples. And bound in the sense, not in the sense of inwardly, but compelled to follow a certain course. You know, he's taken on the material plane and then the laws of the material plane have to play out. Like Jesus had to play out that whole drama and try to bring this message to the Jews and have the Jews reject it and then be crucified and all of that because that was the role he stepped into. And so he took it on. Inwardly, however, there was always a part of him that is somewhat separated from it, more so than... But it's not necessarily that they live in that part because they have to commit themselves to this drama. It's multi-level.
So Yogananda didn't necessarily have to study with
Sri
Yukteswar, but as an example of...
He didn't have to in the sense that he didn't need to do it in order to attain his liberation, but he needed to do it in order to play the part of Yogananda. You know, once he became Yogananda, he had to act out all the parts that were part of Yogananda. And I don't know how to explain it because I have no idea what it feels like, but some part of them is in it. And some part of it, a deeper part of it, is not in it. So it's a very sincere story. The way I've often thought of it is, if this is the astral world and this is the material world, and we're in the astral world, and our karma pulls us into the material world, it's like we get thrown over the wall. And you know, all the spiritual life is here, suddenly we're here. Now, we get thrown over the wall, we end up with our backs to the wall, and we get all attracted to all this pretty stuff. And we go out for a long ways, usually in our lives, and then all of a sudden it occurs to us that what we're seeing is reflected light, and that the source of light is back here. So we try to turn around, and then we make the effort to get back to the light and get back over it or get back through it. And that's all of our changing the habits. You know, teaching ourselves to find joy in the source of light instead of just in the reflected light. The avatar doesn't get drawn, but he leaves. But he doesn't go this way. As soon as he lands, he turns back and then begins to burrow his way back through this obstruction that the material plane imposes between us and the spirit. So his sadhana, I mean, what makes them different is that they always know where they're going. And they have to, but they still, because they've been thrown over the wall, have to put out the same enormous amount of effort to chisel through this wall, because that's how it's done. Once you're here, that's how you do it. You don't just do it by saying, oh, I think I'll just get free. You have to chisel through the wall. And they're bound by the fact that they came to teach us how to get from the material plane to spirit. So they have to show us how to get from the material plane to spirit. They can't, if they're not going to show us, they shouldn't have come.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose the other thing is if you incarnate as a human, you at least have to go through the normal human growth pattern where when you know nothing
Yeah.
from being a child anyway. So there's
Something
just
has
looking
to-
at human biology, there's a certain process that you have to do anyway.
Right.
So
Well, they took the part. I'm going to play the part of a human being. But you know, an actor, I mean, you can think of it even like a really good actor. If you're really, really good at acting, you lose yourself in the part. But you still know that you're yourself. But yet at the same time, you can become so absorbed in the part that the part is also you. And so in a sense, an avatar will play a part like that.
So Yogananda might have forgotten how to go into samadhi before he was with Sri Yukteswar. But
I don't know.
you don't know.
There's a lot in that book that is, you just don't know. Like Yogananda said, for example, he said all those saints that I visited as a child, he said they all tried to learn from me. But that's not how he wrote it. He said they were all trying to learn from me. He said I found it very frustrating. That's what Swami said recently.
So part of that might have also just been written that way for us.
For us. And even the story you mentioned, the going into cosmic consciousness, when Yogananda left Sri Yukteswar, left his guru to go and be in the Himalayas, and he went to visit Ram Gopal Muzumdar, and then Ram Gopal sent him back to Sri Yukteswar. Do you have a place, a quiet place you can meditate? Yes, well let that be your Himalayan cave. And he sent him back to Sri Yukteswar, and then Yogananda walks in and says, you know, I'm back. And or you must be angry with me. Yukteswar says, why would I be angry? I would have to expect something from you to be angry. And then he just puts him, you know, just takes him right back in and then gives him the experience of cosmic consciousness. Well, Swami said publicly in the Sisi, and he'd said it privately before, Yogananda was gone for a year. In the book, he makes it just seem like a very short visit. He was gone for a year. He went to the Himalayas for a whole year. And just, you know, there he was. I wish he'd put that in there because there he was. He left his guru and thought he could get it on his own. He'd always wanted to go to the Himalayas. Sri Yukteswar told him, no, that's not going to work for you. But, you know, in his first encounter with his guru, he rebelled. So it shows you that these are wonderful examples because they show you, instead of our sort of getting this funny picture of what it's supposed to be like, measuring ourselves against our false images and never succeeding, you get a real picture of what it's really like. And then when the same things happen to you, you say, oh, I get this. You know, this is what it really is. That's why Swamiji's life is so fascinating, because it's such an incredibly rich and interesting and real life. You know, so much has happened in that life, and yet the fruit of it is extraordinary spiritual awareness and spiritual power. So that must be how you get there, you know? And that means that a lot's going to happen to all of us.
I mean, certainly seeing, you know, I think especially with Swami, seeing just like him being ousted from SRF and how devastating he was by that. It's like, okay, so I guess, I'm not so low on the totem pole if I'm devastated by whatever blah, blah, blah happens to me, you know. Just, there is an aspect of seeing the masters and, you know, very far evolved people going through these things to make you not ridicule yourself and knock yourself down so much for whatever our own personal feelings.
Absolutely. And also tells you this is what happens. I can just expect this. I can't just sort of think that now that I'm on the spiritual path, nothing's ever going to happen to me. I'll just be easy from here on out. And then you'll be so shocked, positively shocked when it's not. No.
The hope is that you just have more tools to help you through it.
The fact is that you have more tools to help you through it. Totally different. Because it's just a different game. It's a completely different game. You know, I mean, I often think when dark things happen, what do people do who don't have a perspective? Who don't think about karma and reincarnation and past lives and self-realization and liberation? What do they do? And then what they do is what we all did, which is they suffer until such time as they've suffered enough to be willing to go into the unknown. There we have it. We meet the perfect circle. We better stop while we're ahead, yes.
Kind of in regard to what you asked,
about, about coming into this lifetime as an avatar. When you asked that question, what's occurred to me in the past was when Yogananda was in his book and towards the end of his incarnation, how he would go up into a high state and he would be revealed things, and but I remember something about that wouldn't have been revealed to him until that late in the game, so to speak, of his life. It's kind of like, it's almost to me like even as far along as he was still, things were still not revealed to him.
But that's not true.
Is
That statement that you made, it wasn't revealed to him until the end of his life. I have no context for that. I've never heard that before.
Okay.
He might not have revealed it to others.
Okay.
He might not have presented himself to others in that way. He might have been more willing to present himself as he was at the end of his own life.
Okay.
But it was more for the sake of his mission, not for his own sake. See,
Okay.
that's everything is done for the sake of the mission. It's nothing is done. The avatar has nothing that he has to do or needs to do for himself. Nothing. Everything is done for the sake of the mission and the disciples.
Okay.
And so whatever pattern it follows, it's only because the disciples he's serving and the time in which he's living requires it. Not that he requires it. Because he needs nothing. That's what makes him an avatar. He needs nothing.
Okay.
Okay, he acts like he needs things because that's the role that he has to play.